When two security guards tried to remove a black Marine from his son's graduation, no one expected 6 Navy SEALs to rise from the crowd and stop the room without saying a word. What started as quiet disrespect became a powerful moment the entire town would never forget. This is not just a story about military brotherhood. It's a story about dignity, silence, and the strength it takes to stand when the world tells you to move. Solomon Dryden didn't expect to be noticed. He wasn't wearing his Marine dress blues for attention. He wore them because they meant something, because the moment meant something. As he pulled into the parking lot behind Elmridge High, everything about the building was familiar in that timeless way schools in small-town Texas tend to be. Red brick faded by sun and storms, flags flapping above the entrance, kids loitering by the gym in cliques, already buzzing with end-of-year energy. But beneath the normalcy was something sacred. His son Tyron was graduating today, and no matter what it took, Solomon had promised himself he'd be there. He'd driven 8 hours from Temple alone, in the same Dodge Charger his late wife had adored. Flying might have been faster, but the road had a rhythm and memories that made him feel closer to her. Before stepping out, he reached for the glove box. Inside was a photo, his wife cradling Tyron as a newborn, faded and creased from time and travel. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. "I promised you," he whispered. The air smelled of summer and asphalt, laughter and distant concessions. He stepped out of the car, every crease in his uniform crisp, boots reflecting the sun. There was no need for spectacle. His presence spoke for itself. Solomon walked slowly to the entrance, absorbing the joy and chaos of graduation day. Families carried balloons. Grandmothers leaned on walkers. Children squirmed in Sunday clothes. Solomon passed them all, ticket in hand, head held high. Inside, the gym buzzed like a beehive, bleachers full, folding chairs packed, banners across the wall declaring, "Class of 2024. He showed his ticket to a volunteer who pointed him to 3rd row, left side, family seating. Solomon thanked him with a nod and made his way forward, catching curious glances and polite nods. Some looked twice at the uniform. Most turned away after a heartbeat, unsure how to respond. A woman smiled softly. A man beside her avoided eye contact. Solomon was used to this. Tall, black, and in uniform was a combination that came with a lifetime of loaded looks and quiet calculations. He sat in his seat, the plastic chair slightly wobbly beneath him. No complaints. He adjusted, platted his feet, and settled in. In the front, the stage was set with banners and podiums. Students in caps and gowns waited nervously in the wings. Among them, his son stood, tall, lean, with his mother's eyes. Solomon's thoughts traveled back to Okinawa, to the dirt still under his nails the day Tyron was born. He had just 4 days of leave then. And now, 18 years later, he was here. He was present, fully. As the national anthem played, Solomon stood, shoulders square, arms to his sides, eyes forward. His body was a salute, his presence a statement. Then the shift began. 2 uniformed men from Harlan Security Services began making their way toward him, black polos tucked into cargo pants, radios clipped at the waist. They didn't look like police, just hired muscle. One was stocky, bald, and intense. The other, taller and chewing gum. Solomon noticed them immediately, but did not react. Stillness, he'd learned, often held more power than movement. "Excuse me, sir," the bald one said, leaning in. "We're going to need you to come with us." Solomon turned slowly. "Is there a problem?" "This section's for family members," the gum chewer added. Solomon reached into his pocket, pulled out his printed ticket, and handed it over. 3rd row, left side. Family seating confirmed. They didn't even look at it. "We got told it's full," the bald one said. Solomon didn't move. "It was full when I sat down, too," he said evenly. "Who gave that order?" Now, the tension had begun to ripple. People were watching. Phones tilted. The guards tried again. "Let's not make this anything it doesn't have to be." "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk across that stage," Solomon replied. "I'll be sitting right here." The air shifted. Something unspoken had been violated. A line crossed, but Solomon remained unmoved, calm, rooted, unshaken. As the tension thickened around Solomon's chair, a new current started to stir in the gymnasium. It wasn't loud. There were no raised voices, no dramatic entrances, just a single sound, the faint click of a gymnasium door near the back as it opened. And then one man walked in. No uniform, no fanfare, just a presence. He was tall, salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, eyes scanning the room with precise calm. His steps were slow, measured. He wasn't there for a ceremony. He was there for something else. Creed Marston didn't need an introduction, at least not to Solomon. He had pulled Creed out of a blown-out Humvee in Kandahar, dragging him through sand and bullets with nothing but grit and God on his side. Creed remembered. They all did. That's why they were here. That's why, when Creed took a seat near the center aisle, without saying a word, others began to follow. One by one, men entered the gym. They didn't sit together, didn't nod to each other, didn't speak. But they moved the same way. Alert, quiet, deliberate. Navy SEALs. The guards, Garvin and Malley, hadn't noticed them yet. They were still hovering near Solomon, trying to pressure him into moving. They didn't realize the air had changed. The crowd was sensing it, though. People shifted in their seats, eyes darting back and forth. Tension had become curiosity. The woman beside Solomon leaned closer. "Don't let them move you," she whispered. Solomon gave the faintest nod. Garvin muttered into his radio, not breaking eye contact. Solomon sat motionless. Behind him, a man stood up. No one noticed at first. Then another stood, this one across the aisle. Then a third. Like ghosts stepping from shadows, they rose silently and positioned themselves around the room, not blocking exits, not forming a wall. Just there, watching, standing. Malley leaned in closer. "I'm trying to do you a favor, all right?" he said under his breath. Solomon's reply was ice. "You don't have that kind of favor to offer." And then the voice came, clear and calm. "Is there a reason this man is being bothered?" Creed had stepped forward. The tone of his voice didn't rise. It dropped. That kind of voice made others stop talking. Garvin looked up, confused. "Who are you?" he asked. Creed didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer. "You're embarrassing yourselves," he said, "and you're one breath from making it worse." Now the guards looked around. The room was no longer on their side. Eyes were watching, phones recording. The two men realized they were outnumbered, outranked, outclassed. Garvin shifted uncomfortably. "He needs to move to the back." Creed didn't flinch. "No, he doesn't." Solomon stayed seated. He hadn't spoken since the guards first approached, but his silence was louder than any argument. Behind him, 6 SEALs now stood, each in a different spot, yet unified in posture. The crowd understood. This wasn't just a military reunion. This was something deeper. A bond forged in war. A loyalty beyond orders. Garvin's mouth moved again, tried to find words, but he had none. Malley stepped back first. Then Garvin. The principal appeared near the aisle, whispering quickly. The guards turned and walked toward the back exit, deflated. Creed sat down again, arms folded. Solomon exhaled, slow and steady. The SEALs remained standing. A statement had been made, without a single shout. The gym wasn't the same anymore. Tyron Dryden stood in line with the other graduating seniors, cap slightly tilted, honor cords looped around his neck. The buzz of excitement was everywhere. Kids adjusting gowns, laughing nervously, checking their name cards like the world wasn't about to change. But for Tyron, the world had already shifted. He hadn't heard the words exchanged between the guards and his father, but he didn't need to. From the moment the national anthem ended, and he saw the 2 security men move toward his dad, something in his chest clenched. It wasn't fear. Tyron had seen that look in his father's eyes before, the same calm, composed stillness that never cracked under pressure. He remembered it from when he was 12 and came home crying after a kid on the bus called him something he shouldn't have. His dad didn't yell, didn't storm to the school. He just sat beside him on the porch, silent, solid, and somehow unshakable. That same stillness was in him now. 3rd row left, hands resting on his thighs, eyes forward, while two men hovered over him, like they didn't know who they were dealing with. At first, Tyrant thought maybe it was just a seating mix-up. Maybe the guards were helping someone find a chair. But the way they leaned in, the way they didn't back off even when his dad didn't flinch, told him something else, something familiar. And then it began. A man stood near the center aisle, tall, steady, with a beard streaked in gray and an energy that made people pause. He didn't look like a teacher or a parent. He looked like someone who had seen the same wars that had left stories buried in Solomon Dryden silence. And somehow, even from across the gym, Tyron knew this man was there for his father. Then another man stood up, and another, one by one, like ripples across a lake. They weren't disruptive. They weren't loud. They just rose, each one of them carrying something heavy in their silence. Tyron didn't know their names, but he felt like he had known them forever. He'd grown up seeing glimpses of these men in photo albums that rarely left the bookshelf, hearing about them in stories his dad never fully finished. "A buddy I served with," he would say. Or, "A man who pulled me out once." Now those stories had faces. They had shoulders broad enough to carry pain and discipline alike. The energy in the gym changed. The ceremony was still going, names being called, clapping echoing through the bleachers. But more and more eyes drifted toward Solomon Dryden and the scene unfolding around him. Teachers hesitated. Parents exchanged glances. A boy 2 rows ahead of Tyron whispered to someone and tilted his phone to record. Still, his father didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, an immovable center of calm. Tyron's hands clenched at his sides. His name was still a dozen places down the line, but his heart pounded like he was already on stage. He thought about walking off, about stepping out of line and confronting those guards himself. But something held him back. Not fear, not indecision. It was a memory, his father's voice from years ago. "Sometimes, son, you win the moment by not letting it take you off balance. Let them move. You stay steady." And so he did. Tyron stayed in line, stayed silent, but his eyes never left that row. He watched as his father's allies slowly claimed their positions, a quiet force in a noisy world. He watched the guards begin to falter, begin to realize they weren't in control anymore. And he watched his father remain centered, not to prove a point, but because it was the only way he knew how to live. The clapping resumed, louder this time. People trying to act like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just witnessed a moment of real power unfold without a word. An assistant principal tapped Tyron's shoulder and said something he didn't hear. He nodded anyway. The student beside him leaned over wide-eyed. "That's your dad." Tyron didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the whole gym knew. And the moment he stepped on that stage, they would all understand even more. When Tyron Dryden's name was called, it echoed across the gym like a drumbeat, loud, deliberate, and resonant. The announcer's voice didn't crack, but it shifted, just slightly. Like even he knew that this name meant something more today. Tyron took a step forward, then another, legs steady but heart rattling inside his chest. The tassel on his cap swung gently with each movement, the bright yellow cords on his shoulders bouncing against the black fabric of his gown. He didn't look back at his classmates. He didn't need to. Every eye in the room was already on him. His walk wasn't just across a stage. It was through a gauntlet of meaning. Every step carried the weight of a son raised by a man who taught without speaking, who loved without needing applause. Every step was layered with years of watching his father return from deployments with new scars, but the same steady calm. And today, as that same man sat 3 rows from the front, refusing to be pushed aside, Tyron walked toward him, not just as a graduate, but as his legacy. On stage, Principal Reeds reached out to shake his hand. "Congratulations, Tyron," he said, his voice barely audible over the applause. Tyron nodded, gripping his hand with quiet confidence, but he didn't pause for long. He took his diploma, turned, and looked out at the crowd. Not everyone was clapping. Some were still stunned by the earlier confrontation. Others were unsure how to process what they'd witnessed. But there were many now, who stood. It started with Creed. His frame straightened, boots clicking as he stood at full height. Then the others followed, 5 men who had served with Solomon in places most Americans only saw in movies. Men who had been broken, rebuilt, and bonded by fire. They rose together in silence, back straight, eyes on Tyron. One by one, parents and spectators joined them, some unsure why they stood, only knowing that something profound had just happened. Others understood all too well. Tyron didn't smile, didn't wave. He just stepped off the stage, walked down the center aisle with purpose, and didn't look away from his father. Solomon met his gaze with a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but Tyron caught it. It said everything. I see you. I'm proud of you. You did it. And then, for the first time since he sat down, Solomon stood. It wasn't showy. There was no dramatic flourish, no salute. Just a quiet, deliberate rise from his chair, spine straight as a rifle barrel. He adjusted the front of his coat, squared his shoulders, and clapped. 3 slow, intentional claps that echoed louder than the rest. They carried weight. Not just the pride of a father, but the recognition of a journey that was never easy, never guaranteed. Tyron walked directly to him. No detours, no distractions. He stepped into his father's arms, not with the awkward half-hug of teenage boys unsure of themselves, but with the full embrace, head against his father's shoulder, arms around him like he'd waited his whole life for this moment. The gym fell into a hush. For that brief instant, the ceremony faded. There were no other names, no marching band, no balloons. Just a Marine in full dress uniform, holding his son, as the world looked on. When they finally pulled apart, Solomon said only 5 words. Your mother would be proud. Tyron nodded, blinking fast. She is. They sat down side by side. No more guards hovered nearby. Garvin and Malley were nowhere to be seen. The principal had quietly instructed the remaining staff not to interfere further. The message had been received loud and clear, not just about one man's right to watch his son graduate, but about the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground without ever raising your voice. As the ceremony resumed, families began to relax again, but the air still hummed with the electricity of what had just transpired. A young girl in the bleachers whispered to her mother, "Was he in a movie or something?" The mother didn't answer. She just looked at Solomon and Tyron, then down at her phone, still recording. Because moments like these weren't made for the news. They were made for memory. And this one had just carved itself into the heart of an entire town when the final name was called and the last mortarboard had hit the gym floor with a slap. The graduating class of Elmridge high erupted into a collective cheer. The band played an upbeat medley. Balloons floated from the ceiling, and confetti launched into the air in bursts of red, white, and gold. But even amid the joy, there was still a low murmur under the noise. Whispers, retellings, glances over shoulders. The story of what happened earlier was already growing legs, reshaping itself in real time. Solomon and Tyron didn't stay for the cake and punch in the cafeteria. They didn't need to. What needed to be said had already been felt in every clap, every glance, every silence. But as they made their way toward the exit, the ripple followed them. A few teachers nodded respectfully. A coach stepped out of the crowd to shake Solomon's hand. "Glad you were here, sir," he said, eyes earnest. Another voice called out, one of Tyron's classmates. "Yo, that was your dad." Tyron turned and gave a small, proud smile. "Yeah, that's him." Outside, the heat had climbed, turning the parking lot into a shimmering field of pavement and chrome. Solomon paused at the edge of the sidewalk, letting Tyron take a few steps ahead before speaking. "You did good," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything," Tyron replied. "You did enough," Solomon said. He glanced around. The Charger was still parked where he left it, tucked under the partial shade of a tired-looking oak tree. He unlocked it with a click. Before they could open the doors, a voice stopped them. "Excuse me, sir." It wasn't aggressive, not like the security guards earlier. It was hesitant, careful. A woman stood nearby, holding a notepad and a phone. Local news. Her badge read, "Kimberly Reese, Channel 9 KDXA. Mind if I ask a couple questions?" Solomon looked at Tyron, then back at her. "About what?" "Well," she said, almost sheepishly, We had some reports from inside. There was a situation, but mostly, I just wanted to ask what it meant to be here today. In uniform. For your son. For a second, Solomon didn't answer. The sun beat down. The wind tugged at the flagpole above the gym. Then, with calm precision, Solomon responded. I wore this uniform in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in places most folks wouldn't bother putting on a map. I didn't wear it today to prove anything. I wore it because it's who I am, and because my son earned this moment, and no one, no matter how much power they think they have, was going to take it from him. Kimberly nodded, jotting the words down fast as she could. And the men who stood with you. Solomon smiled, just barely. They weren't standing with me. They were standing for what's right. That's what we were trained to do. She thanked him. Tyron offered a nod of his own. Then both father and son got into the car. As they pulled away, the school shrank in the rearview mirror, but the moment had already taken on a life of its own. Videos posted to social media began gaining traction. The clip of Creed's voice, "You're embarrassing yourselves," hit thousands of views by nightfall. By morning, it would be trending. But none of that mattered to Solomon. Not really. He wasn't chasing headlines or hashtags. He had come to fulfill a promise. And he had done it. Back home in Temple. The house still held echoes of Tyron's childhood. The hand-painted growth chart on the pantry door. The framed art projects his mother had saved. That night, Solomon grilled steaks in the backyard. They didn't talk about the guards. They didn't talk about the SEALs. They talked about college, about Tyron's plans, about who he wanted to become. Later, Tyron brought out a small, weathered photo album. I found this in Mom's stuff, he said. Inside were pictures Solomon hadn't seen in years. One from his wedding day. One of Tyron's first steps. One of Solomon holding his son in full combat gear, smiling through exhaustion. You think she saw it today? Tyron asked. Solomon looked at the photo, then at the stars overhead. She saw everything. In towns like Elmridge, stories like this don't disappear. They become part of the fabric. The principal quietly asked the school board to review Harlan Security's contract. The guards never came back. A week later, an anonymous donor gifted a scholarship in honor of those who stand with quiet strength. It went to Tyron, but the real legacy, it lived in the silence that came after the applause, in the quiet dignity of a father who refused to be moved, and in the son who understood. From that day forward, that dignity didn't have to be loud. It just had to be unbreakable. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that real strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it simply stands tall and says nothing, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. At Black Echoes Global, we honor the stories that echo beyond injustice into legacy, because some stories aren't just told, they're felt. Join the movement.